Hello, this is Belinda from Belinda's Book Nook, and I'm here today to talk to you about my February reads. First off, I had the flu all last week, so I have been MIA everywhere, just trying to kind of recover and get my energy back and everything. But I wanted to make sure I got back on schedule somehow, and talk about the books that I read in February. I had a very ambitious thought, but I didn't read everything that I wanted to, but I read most of the things that I wanted to. And so I think I'm going to break them into different videos just to talk about them a little bit further. The first one I wanted to talk to you guys about was The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson. Now y'all know that this was the book that I had put on my list as one of my top 12 that I wanted to talk about this year and read this year, and I did it. I'm happy to say that this chunkster and I are no longer at odds with one another, that I actually managed to do it. How did I do it, she said? Well, I did my very first buddy read with Alba from Seriela. I'll link her channel below. She was really a good person to be the first person to do a buddy read with, because I'm always intimidated about it because, pardon me, I brought water, so hopefully I won't do that the whole time, but because she's really patient, first of all. I'm a slow reader, so I'm always thinking, what if I don't finish the book? The person's never going to want to read with me again. I fell off schedule a couple of times, but she was very gracious about that. And we communicated via Goodreads and just kind of weekly checked in and talked about the book, and it really helped. This book gives you a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. Sorry. The Isabella Wilkerson did, I believe it's 15 years of interviews and research to create this book, and she was able to talk about the migration, which started in the 1950s and kind of ended in the 70s. If you kind of, read how the book is kind of laid out, it really, really kind of came all the way up that far. I'm sorry, this is horrible. So she took the opportunity to take three different individuals, to be able to tell the story of the mass migration of blacks from the South to the North. And I think that was the best way to do this, because, if she just sat there and dispute off interviews and things like that, I think it would be boring and tedious. And this, you just felt compelled to find out what was going to happen with the characters. So there's three characters in here. One was Ida May, and one was George. What's George's last name? One was George Starling, and the third was Robert Joseph Pershing Foster, who ended up shortening his name to Robert Foster. And they all didn't know each other, so it's not like the stories will overlap with each other. So it was great because it gave you a good perspective in terms of there's no one migration story. They're all thousands and thousands of them. And so this gave you a good broad kind of overview of that. And Ida May's story, it was just interesting to follow each of them, and each chapter would be on the different person, and you would continue to follow them in their journey. I felt like, I spent a lot of time writing this book. I don't usually write in books, but I did. I wrote in here and underlined a lot. In the beginning, just even like reading about the sharecropping, which was basically another form of slavery, writing about, underlining things that I read in the story that really, really bothered me. The other thing that the book did bring up, I'm going to pull the book up again so you can still see it, is it talked about lynching. And I have not really read a lot about lynching. I know of it. I've heard of instances. And I know that it's like left out of basically our educational system. It's tough material. And in order to grow, we have to read hard things. And that is something that is very, very challenging to read about, but it's important for us to understand and know about it. There's a gentleman that they mentioned in there, and his name was Claude Neal. And I love when I'm reading something and learning something, and then something in a totally different area comes about and crosses my path and is related. And I say that because they were talking about Claude Neal, who I think was in page 60 of the book. They talk about his lynching, how it came to be, what happened, and it was heart-wrenching. And then probably 2 days later, I was listening to Code Switch, which is a podcast that I absolutely love. If you ever get a chance, I'll link below a link to the one that I'm going to refer to right now. They have really good quality programming on different issues. And they happen to be talking about Claude Neal and his lynching, and gave a really good overview about what happened and everything that led up to it. I guess, I knew that lynching existed. I didn't understand to the degree of how much of a entertaining factor it was. People would bring their children to see this. His was particularly horrific. It was documented, so you're able to know exactly what they did to him. And people are there with their children. People are taking pictures in front of his body. There are postcards made. These are things that are just hard to read and learn about, but important. Again, in order for us to grow, we have to challenge ourselves, and these are definitely challenging pieces of information. So I'll leave a link to that below. One of the things that I found also interesting in the stories of the individuals was Robert. He came from a educated family. His father was a principal. His mother was a teacher at a colored school. Colored was the word then used in down south, and he had the opportunity to get a taste of pursuing more of his education, and for various reasons had to stop and and resume and go through the different struggles. And he ended up becoming a doctor, and his journey of watching him go through being a doctor and then only being able to treat people of color, but then going outside of the country during wartime and being treated very differently outside, and then coming back into the system here was very interesting to watch. And when he realized that he couldn't stay any longer in the South, where he was not able to fully practice medicine, he decided to go to California. And his journey going to California was just so harrowing. It was like watching a movie, and you're just like, oh my God, it's gonna die. We think about the movie. I didn't see the Green Book, but I know that it was, there was a lot of accolades for it. For various reasons, I didn't watch it, but I do want to read the new book about the Green Book. And it's basically a book that the Black people put together, telling each other how to travel and where to go and where you could stay and where you're safe, so that you can move and navigate around the country. And he utilized this, but it's not something that's updated always. So he basically had to really just keep driving until he could get to California, and very few stops. He had to make sure he stopped at places that they would serve and provide him with gas. So watching that journey was heart-wrenching. And also, him going to the unknown of California, of what he thinks is going to happen and what does happen, is also interesting to witness. And Ida Mae, her journey of moving from the South to the North and seeing how, one of the things that was really struck me was the relationship between existing Blacks in the North and Blacks that were migrating. There was a perceived threat of the new, of the Blacks that were migrating in, and versus the Blacks that were existing, that had already lived there and been there. And so that didn't lead itself to them being helpful to help them navigate and be able to settle in. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that although the blacks were migrating from the South, they had been here since the beginning of time of slavery, and they had been providing free labor because nobody paid them during slavery, and barely paid them, if you want to call it that, during the sharecropping time. And so it was really interesting to see the dynamics of people that were actually coming in from other countries and immigrating here, and them versus the blacks that were basically Americans that were just moving within the country. And the resistance for them in terms of housing and jobs and opportunities and schooling and everything like that. There was also a lot of misconceptions that were dispelled about the migrants, that they were uneducated, that they weren't likely to be married or stay married, and all of those things had been proven. She did a great job of utilizing all sorts of resources to fill in and complete the story, which is fascinating to me, because as I do my genealogy, I want to be able to not just tell dates and names, I want to be able to give you the context. And she was able to provide great context with all sorts of, a good portion of this is all just reference material of seeing where she got all of the information to fill in the information. And one of the things that, she was able to prove is that these families were coming up here, these marriages were staying together, these were the educated ones that were trying to migrate and better themselves, to continue to better themselves up north. So it wasn't the scenario that was kind of perpetuated in the media and around in the community when they reached the north. I think it was just a fascinating book. I know I could sit here and talk on, and these are just notes between Alba and I. Look at that. We went back and forth, and I'm forever grateful for our online dialogue about this book. It's an important book. I think that everybody should get a chance to read. I'm finally glad that I got a chance to read it, and I think that you won't regret it. It's a big book, but it's definitely, I don't want to use the word enjoyable, but it was definitely a good, it's a good read. And I ended up at one point getting behind, and I got the audiobook out, and it was Robin Givens, is that her name? I think Robin Miles, not Givens. Robin Miles that does the narration, and she does a fantastic job. So I would just sit and read along as she read to me the second half of the book, and it was phenomenal that way. So you could do it that way as well, but you're going to want the book because you're going to want to underline and remember and be able to look back at the facts of this book. Great book. Glad I read it. Anybody wants to comment below, I'm glad for any discussion. It was a really, really good book. I will talk to you guys soon. I hope you're all well. Bye.